Have you ever woken up one morning and just thought, okay, something has to change? Like, not tomorrow, not next Monday, not after the holidays, right now.
Oh, absolutely. I think most people have had that moment at least once. That feeling where you look at your life and realize that what you've been doing isn't really working anymore. It's like you've been on autopilot, just going through the motions, and suddenly something snaps you out of it.
Exactly. And I love that phrase, going through the motions. For our listeners who might not be familiar with it, it basically means doing things out of habit, without really thinking about them or being fully present. You're physically doing the action, but your heart isn't really in it.
That's a perfect way to put it. And honestly, I think a huge number of people live like that for years, sometimes decades. They wake up, go to work, come home, watch something, go to sleep, and repeat. And at some point, there's this quiet voice inside that starts saying, "Is this really it?"
And that voice is so important, isn't it? Because a lot of people actually hear it, but then push it down. They tell themselves, I'll deal with that later, I'm too busy, things aren't that bad. And later never really comes.
Right. And what's interesting is that psychologists actually have a name for this kind of avoidance. It's called, and I'm going to simplify this because the technical term is a mouthful, it's basically the idea that we're more afraid of the discomfort of change than we are of the discomfort of staying the same. So we stay stuck because stuck feels familiar.
That is so true. Familiar is comfortable, even when it's making you miserable. Which sounds a bit absurd when you say it out loud, doesn't it?
It does, but that's genuinely how the human brain works. Our brains are wired, meaning they're naturally designed to prefer the known over the unknown. Change feels like a threat, even when that change is good for us.
So let's dig into this a little. When we talk about changing your life, and I mean really changing it, not just switching up your gym routine or trying a new diet for 2 weeks, what does that actually look like?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that real change is rarely dramatic. We tend to imagine it like a movie moment, the big speech, the dramatic decision, the complete overnight transformation. But in reality, meaningful change is usually pretty quiet and gradual. It's built out of small, consistent choices.
I like that. Quiet and gradual. Because I think a lot of people get discouraged when they try to change everything at once. They burn out quickly and then feel like they failed, and that failure becomes its own obstacle.
Exactly. And that's actually a really common pattern. Someone decides they're going to completely overhaul, completely redesign their entire life. New job, new fitness plan, new diet, better sleep, meditation every morning, all starting Monday. And by Wednesday, they've already given up on most of it.
The classic Monday commitment. I have been that person, I will not lie.
Me too, honestly, many times. But what I've learned, and what a lot of research backs up, is that lasting change comes from starting small and building momentum. Momentum meaning the energy and motivation that builds up as you start seeing small results.
So it's about lowering the barrier to entry, making it easier to start. Because if you're waiting until you feel perfectly ready or perfectly motivated, well, that moment is probably never going to arrive.
And that's such an important point. People often wait for motivation to strike before they take action. But actually, it works the other way around. Action creates motivation. You don't feel motivated and then start. You start, and then the motivation follows.
That genuinely changes how you think about it, doesn't it? Because if you're sitting around waiting to feel inspired to change your life, you could be waiting for a very long time.
Years, potentially. And here's the thing, life doesn't pause while you're waiting to feel ready. Time keeps moving. And one of the biggest regrets people tend to have, especially later in life, is not that they tried something and it didn't work out, but that they never tried at all.
That's quite sobering, actually. Sobering meaning it's a bit of a wake-up call. It makes you sit up and take things seriously. So let's talk about what actually triggers that decision to change. What gets people to the point where they finally commit?
It's different for everyone, but there are some common triggers. One big one is what researchers call a life event, something that disrupts your normal routine in a significant way. It could be a job loss, the end of a relationship, a health scare, turning a certain age, or even watching someone close to you go through something difficult.
So sometimes it takes something external to shake us out of that autopilot mode we were talking about earlier.
Often, yes, but here's something that I find really fascinating and slightly uncomfortable. The trigger doesn't always have to be negative. Some people have their moment when something wonderful happens and they realize they're not as happy as they should be. Like they get the promotion they always wanted. And instead of feeling elated, instead of feeling genuinely happy and over the moon, they feel empty. And that emptiness becomes the catalyst.
Wow, that's a really powerful observation. The realization that you've been chasing the wrong thing, or chasing something that you thought would fulfill you and it didn't.
And that can feel very disorienting, almost like the ground shifts beneath your feet, because your whole sense of direction was built around reaching that goal, and now you're there and you're still not satisfied. It forces you to ask much deeper questions.
Like, what do I actually want? What matters to me? Not what I was told should matter or what looks good from the outside, but genuinely, deep down, what kind of life do I want to be living?
Exactly. And those are uncomfortable questions because the answers aren't always easy or convenient. Sometimes the honest answer involves making choices that are genuinely difficult. Leaving a stable job, moving to a different city, ending a relationship that looks fine on paper but isn't right for you.
And that's where a lot of people hit a wall. They know what needs to change. They actually know, but the cost of changing feels too high, and so they talk themselves out of it.
There's actually a term for this, and I think it's a useful one. It's called the status quo bias. Basically, we tend to favor keeping things as they are even when change would clearly benefit us, because change involves risk, and our brains hate risk.
Status quo bias. I love learning these kinds of terms because they help you name what's happening. And once you can name something, it becomes a little easier to deal with, doesn't it?
It really does. There's something almost liberating about being able to say, oh, I'm not lazy or weak or incapable. I'm experiencing a completely normal psychological response that has a name and a reason behind it. That's not an excuse to stay stuck, but it is a reason to be kinder to yourself while you're figuring things out.
That's such a healthy way to frame it, because I think one of the biggest enemies of change is self-criticism, the inner voice that tells you, you've already tried and failed. What makes you think this time will be different?
Oh, that voice is brutal, and so many people have it. It's relentless. But here's the thing. That voice is not telling the truth. It's telling you a story that's based on your past, not your potential. And those are two very different things.
I want to sit with that for a second because I think it's really profound. Your past is not your potential. Just because something didn't work before doesn't mean it can't work now. You're not the same person you were the last time you tried.
Exactly. You have more experience, more self-awareness, possibly a different approach, a different mindset. And even if the external circumstances haven't changed much, you have, and that matters enormously.
So let's get a little more practical here. Let's say someone is listening right now, and they're thinking, yes, this is me. I know I need to change something in my life. Where do they start?
Okay, so I think the very first step, and this might sound almost too simple, is to get honest with yourself about what's actually not working. Not what other people think isn't working, not what looks like a problem from the outside, but what feels off to you on the inside.
And that requires a level of self-reflection that not everyone is comfortable with. Sitting quietly with your own thoughts without distraction can actually be quite confronting, quite challenging or uncomfortable in a meaningful way.
Right. And I think that's why so many people avoid it. We keep ourselves busy. We fill every quiet moment with our phones, with noise, with other people's content. Because silence means we might have to listen to ourselves, and ourselves might have something difficult to say.
That's a really honest observation. So step 1, get honest with yourself. Step 2?
Step 2, and this is where I think people go wrong, is to pick one thing. Just one. Not 7 things, not a complete life makeover, one area that you want to shift. Maybe it's your health, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's your career, or how you spend your free time, or your financial habits. Just one.
And then within that one thing, you break it down further, right? You don't just say, I want to be healthier, you get specific. what does healthier actually look like for you?
Exactly. Specificity is everything. Because I want to be healthier is not a plan, it's a wish. But I'm going to walk for 20 minutes every morning before I look at my phone. That is a plan. It's concrete, it's achievable, and it's measurable.
I love that distinction, a wish versus a plan. And I think a lot of people are walking around with a lot of wishes, but very few actual plans. They know what they want, but they haven't sat down and worked out how to get there in practical terms.
And here's the thing, the plan doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to have every step mapped out before you start. You just need to know what the next step is, just the next one. The rest will become clearer as you move forward.
I think that's really reassuring for people who feel overwhelmed by the whole idea of change. You don't have to know the whole path. You just need enough light to see the next few steps ahead of you.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And there's actually a concept called just-in-time learning, where instead of trying to learn everything up front before you act, you learn what you need at each stage as you go. And I think that applies to life change as well. You don't need to have all the answers before you begin.
Okay, so we've talked about getting honest, picking one thing, getting specific, taking the next step. What about when things get hard? Because change is never just smooth sailing, is it?
Definitely not. And I think one of the most important and underrated skills in life is the ability to keep going when things aren't going well. When you've had a setback, or you're not seeing progress as fast as you expected, or you're just exhausted and wondering if any of this is even worth it.
Resilience, which is one of those words that gets used a lot, but I think is genuinely crucial. It's not about never struggling. It's about how you respond when you do struggle.
Exactly. And resilience isn't something you either have or you don't. It's something you can build. Every time you push through a difficult moment, you're essentially training yourself to be better at handling the next one. It's like a muscle.
I like that metaphor. Resilience as a muscle. You strengthen it through use. And maybe that's why people who've been through hard things often have such a deep capacity to keep going, because they've had more practice.
That's true. And I think perspective plays a huge role in resilience. When something doesn't go to plan, and it won't always go to plan, how you interpret that moment makes all the difference. Are you viewing it as proof that you can't do it, or as information that helps you adjust your approach?
That's such a key mindset shift. Failure as feedback, not as a verdict on your worth or your ability.
Yes, and I think the people who are most successful at meaningful change are not the ones who never fail. They're the ones who fail, learn something, adjust, and try again. They're not perfectionists. They're persistent.
Persistent over perfect. I want to write that one down. Let's talk about the people around us for a minute, because I think that's a big factor that often gets overlooked. The role of other people in our ability to change.
Oh, this is such an important piece. The people you spend the most time with have an enormous influence on you. Your habits, your beliefs, your ambitions, even your sense of what's possible. And sometimes, without meaning to, the people closest to us can be the ones who hold us back.
How so? Because I think people might find that a difficult thing to admit about someone they love.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, but I think it's worth being honest about. Sometimes when you start changing, when you start growing, the people around you feel unsettled by it, because your growth, consciously or not, can make them reflect on their own choices, and that can trigger resistance, even from people who genuinely care about you.
So they might not say, please don't change, but they might undermine you in subtle ways, making jokes about your new habits, being a bit dismissive when you talk about your goals, reminding you of all the times things didn't work out before.
Exactly. And that can really knock the wind out of your sails. It can really deflate your motivation and confidence, especially in the early stages when you're still feeling fragile about the whole thing. You haven't built enough momentum yet to brush it off easily.
So what do you do in that situation? Because you can't necessarily just cut everyone off who isn't perfectly supportive.
No, that's a bit extreme. And honestly, a lot of the time, the people around you will come around once you see you're serious and that you're not abandoning who you are, just growing into a better version of who you already are. But in the meantime, I think it's important to consciously seek out at least one or two people who do support and understand what you're trying to do.
Your people, your team. even if it's just one person who says, "I believe in you. I think you can do this."
That can make such a difference, and it doesn't even have to be someone you know in person. It could be a mentor, a coach, a community online, any space where you feel understood and encouraged. Surrounding yourself with even small pockets of support can give you the fuel to keep going.
I want to ask you something a bit more personal, Jake, if that's okay. Have you ever had a moment where you genuinely decided to change something significant in your own life? And how did that go for you?
Yeah, I have. And it wasn't a dramatic lightning bolt moment or anything like that. It was actually quite quiet. About 5 years ago, I realized that I was completely exhausted all the time. I wasn't enjoying anything that used to bring me joy, and I kept thinking, maybe I'm just tired. But it went on for months. And eventually, I had to sit down and be honest with myself and admit that the life I had built didn't actually match the kind of life I wanted to be living.
That must have been a hard thing to face.
It was, because I had done all the things you're supposed to do. I had a good job, I was making okay money, I had friends, I had stability. Everything looked fine from the outside. But on the inside, I felt completely hollow. And admitting that felt almost ungrateful at first.
Because you thought, I have everything I should want. Why am I not happy?
Exactly. And that confusion itself was really painful. But eventually I stopped questioning whether I had the right to feel what I was feeling, and I just accepted that I did feel it. And from there, I was able to start making changes. Slowly, one at a time. And not all of them worked out perfectly, but I kept adjusting. And now, genuinely, I feel like I'm living a life that actually feels like mine.
That is such an honest and generous thing to share. Thank you for that, Jake. I think a lot of people listening will recognize themselves in what you just described, the hollow feeling behind the perfectly fine life.
And if anyone out there is feeling that right now, I just want to say that feeling is not a flaw in you. It's a signal. It's your inner self trying to get your attention. Don't ignore it.
Beautifully put. Okay, let's talk about something I think comes up a lot when people are on this journey of change, and that's identity. Who am I if I change? Does changing mean I'm betraying who I used to be?
Oh, this is such a rich question. And I think it holds a lot of people back more than they realize. We get very attached to our identity, to our sense of who we are, and change can feel threatening to that. Because if I change, am I still me?
But actually, and tell me if you agree, identity is never really fixed, is it? We've all been changing since the moment we were born. The person you are today is already different from the person you were 10 years ago.
Completely. And in fact, refusing to change is in some ways more of a problem than embracing it, because life keeps moving and evolving around you, and if you're rigidly holding on to who you were, you can end up out of step, out of sync with where you are now and where the world is going.
So change isn't about losing yourself. It's about continuing to become yourself. It's a process, not a destination.
I love that framing. Becoming, not arriving. Because the idea that there's a fixed, perfect version of you that you need to reach and then you're done, that's not how it works. Growth is ongoing. It doesn't stop.
And maybe that's actually good news, because it means you never have to have everything figured out. You just have to keep moving in the right direction.
Exactly. And the direction matters more than the speed. You can go slowly. You can take breaks. You can have setbacks. As long as you're generally moving toward a life that feels true to you, you're doing it.
Let's talk for a moment about the role of fear, because I think fear is the elephant in the room in any conversation about change. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. It's huge.
Massive. And I don't think the goal is to eliminate fear, because that's not really possible. Fear is part of being human. The goal is to learn how to act in spite of it, to feel the fear and move forward anyway. There's actually a famous book with that exact title, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, by Susan Jeffers.
I've heard of that, and the title itself is such a good piece of advice. Not wait until you're not afraid, but feel it, acknowledge it, and then do the thing anyway.
Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something is more important than the fear. And when you start to see it that way, fear becomes less paralyzing. It becomes almost like background noise that you learn to function alongside.
Background noise. I like that. It's there, but it doesn't have to be in charge of your decisions.
Right. And here's something I find really helpful, and I think a lot of people find this, is to ask yourself when you're feeling afraid of a change, what's the worst that could realistically happen? Not the catastrophic, extreme worst case, but the realistic worst case. And then ask yourself, could I survive that? Could I recover from that?
And very often, the answer is yes. The realistic worst case is uncomfortable but survivable. It's not the end of the world, even though it can feel like it in the moment of fear.
And then you flip it around and ask, what's the cost of not changing? What does the next 5 years look like if I stay exactly where I am, doing exactly what I'm doing? And that question can be very clarifying. Sometimes staying feels safer, but it has its own cost.
The cost of staying, the opportunity cost, meaning what you lose by not choosing the other option, that's real. And I think people don't factor that in enough. They're so focused on the risk of changing that they forget to account for the risk of not changing.
It's a great point. And I think if more people really sat with that question, genuinely sat with it, they'd make very different choices, because the risk of staying stuck is often greater than the risk of trying something new and failing.
Okay, I want to touch on something that I think is relevant for a lot of our listeners, specifically, and that's the idea of changing your life when you're an adult. Because I think there's this implicit belief that a certain window closes at some point. Like, yes, you could have changed your life in your 20s, but now you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s. Isn't it too late?
Oh, this myth. This is one of my least favorite things. The idea that there's an expiry date on change, on growth, on pursuing something new. It is absolutely not too late.
And you have examples of this, right? Because I think examples are really powerful here.
So many examples. Vera Wang didn't start designing wedding dresses until she was 40. Julia Child, the famous chef and cookbook author, didn't publish her first cookbook until she was almost 50. Harlan Sanders, yes, Colonel Sanders from KFC, was in his 60s when he started franchising his restaurant. The idea that it's ever too late is simply not supported by evidence.
And even beyond famous examples, there are countless ordinary people who have made extraordinary changes in their lives at every stage of life. You can go back to school at 50. You can start a business at 60. You can fall in love again at 70. Life is long, and it's never entirely too late.
And I'd even argue that there's something beautiful about changing later in life, because you know yourself better. You have more self-awareness. You have less time for things that don't matter, which means you're more focused on things that do.
That's a really lovely way to look at it. Less time becomes a motivator rather than a limitation.
Exactly. The urgency becomes clarifying. When you stop assuming you have infinite time, you start making better choices about how to spend the time you have.
All right, let's bring this all together a little bit, because we've covered a lot of ground today, from what triggers change, to how to start, to dealing with setbacks, to managing fear, to the role of identity in the people around us. What's the single most important thing, Jake, that you'd want someone to take away from this conversation?
If I had to distill it down to one thing, and I thought about this carefully, I would say start before you're ready, because you will never feel completely ready. There will always be another reason to wait, another obstacle, another not quite the right moment. And if you keep waiting for perfect conditions, you'll wait your whole life. So start now. Start imperfect. Start uncertain. Just start.
Start before you're ready. I think that is genuinely some of the most useful and honest advice anyone can give, because it removes the excuse. There is no waiting for perfect. There is only starting or not starting.
And here's the beautiful thing. The moment you start, even imperfectly, everything begins to shift. Your thinking changes. You start to see possibilities you couldn't see before. You get feedback that helps you adjust. You build confidence by doing, not by planning. The whole world opens up a little.
It's like the difference between looking at a map and actually walking the road. No amount of staring at the map prepares you for what you actually discover when you're moving.
What a perfect analogy, the map and the road. You need both, but at some point you have to put the map down and start walking.
Jake, this has been such a rich and genuinely moving conversation. I feel like you brought a lot of heart to this today, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Emma. These are conversations that I think matter, because most of us are walking around carrying questions about our lives that we're afraid to say out loud. And just having them said, in a space like this, can sometimes be the thing that gives someone the permission they needed to take that first step.
And that's exactly why we do this. Not just to teach English, though we hope you've been picking up some great vocabulary and natural expressions along the way, but to have conversations that actually mean something.
And to any listener who's been nodding along today thinking, yes, this is exactly what I needed to hear, I want you to know this is your moment. Not a Monday, not next year, right now.
This is your moment. I couldn't end it better than that, but I want to try anyway. Here's what I'll say to close. Change is not a single dramatic act. It is a series of quiet, brave decisions made over and over again. To choose yourself, to choose growth, to choose the life you actually want, even when that's hard and uncertain and a little terrifying. Every person who has ever built a life they love started from exactly where you are right now, standing at the edge of something new, heart-pounding, wondering if they could really do it. And they could, and so can you.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We genuinely hope something you heard today stays with you, and maybe, just maybe, gives you the push you needed. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and don't wait for perfect. Just start.